Have you ever dealt with the shelves cleaned out during a winter storm threat? It's inconvenient at best, but go back a couple of hundred years and not being prepared for the winter wasn't a mild inconvenience. It could cost you your life. You needed a full pantry, and not just for a few days until the snowplows arrived. And the Native Americans? They knew this. In this frontier mystery, we aim to solve how they survived the winter. But first, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Prep and food storage the indigenous way. A winter storm could last days and have effects that last for weeks, possibly weeks. How could you survive this? By rationing enough food for the winter. Rationing food helped spread out harvests over a longer period of time, ensuring you got enough food to last however long winter lasted. Native Americans were quick to act because they knew just how much they had to put together. As a rule of thumb, you needed to prepare before the first snowflake hit the ground. In some regions, you needed to prepare before the first autumn leaf. So how much food would these Native Americans need? Well, it would take a lot to feed an indigenous tribe. Remember, you need around 2,000 calories a day, and with winter possibly lasting for 6 months, they needed tens of millions of calories for a tribe of 100. While there was a lot of food to prepare, the natives had two things on their side: community and knowledge of the land around them. They saw how fire could turn meat that would rot in days into something that could last for a long time. Smoking meat was a major part of the indigenous way. Maple and hickory helped them smoke meat and add flavor to it. In areas where bison, deer, or elk lived, the natives would hunt and then make jerky by smoking the meat until it was dried and delicious. And when you smoked the meat, it lasted all winter, meaning they had ample protein to turn to. Jerky was also made with fish, creating a sustainable and protein-filled snack. Depending on the region, the waters were filled with salmon, then hung on racks in the sun. Sometimes they had their own smokehouses that gave the fish that perfect flavor and prevented insects from devouring it. Here is an image of a smokehouse that they used. So yes, jerky was a significant part of how the natives survived during the winter. As long as it was correctly stored, jerky could last 6 months. Perfect for the winter. But how did they store it? Think about how you store food. If a winter storm knocks out the power in your home, you may have to take out all the food in your fridge, as it's spoiled. During frontier times, you didn't have fridges either, and ice blocks were a rarity among indigenous tribes. However, even without modern conveniences, natives never had to worry about food storage. Why? Because they used the land to keep their food preserved. Enter the pit. The natives had their own root cellars. Using digging sticks and other tools, they would dig a pit around 3 to 4 feet deep, sometimes even deeper. These pits would be near camps or trails for easy access and stored inside birch bark boxes, leather pouches, or other containers. They would use well-drained soil so that the food wouldn't have to deal with moisture. To add an extra layer of protection, they may light a fire in the pit to dry it out and ensure the walls are hardened for winter. The pit would then be covered with grass or dirt. These were the original refrigerators. They kept the food cool but warm enough so that it wouldn't get freezer burnt by nature. They were noticeable enough for the tribes to find, but hidden away from animals or other possible threats. The design of these root cellars was similar to those found in older houses, a nice homage to a useful, convenient means of storing extra food. To this day, archaeologists are still finding cache pits. As many as 350 were found in 2021 in Michigan, and dried foods were still found in them. And that wasn't the only way they stored food. Depending on the region, some would store it in lava tube caves, such as the Shoshone-Bannock in southern Idaho. In other words, the natives were not starving. They had food. They had plenty, in fact. Sometimes they may have even dug false pits to trick any enemies they may have had. But if you know one thing about the natives, it's that they don't waste food. Every animal is sacred. Every fruit and berry is a gift from nature, and using such gifts gave the natives another opportunity to survive as the deities wished them to. In the modern USA, nearly half of our food is wasted, a contrast to these people. Perhaps we can learn a lesson about food storage and accumulation from these people because they had it down pat and were exact with their dietary requirements. Through generations of ancestor knowledge, the elders determined how much food they needed for the winter. These communities were science-based and offered exact measurements of what was needed, so people were fed without anything being tossed away. We're not saying the natives were perfect about this. Sometimes they'd have more food than they needed, and other times they came short. No matter how much ancestral knowledge you may have, Mother Nature is an unpredictable mistress. But the natives didn't just live on rations throughout winter. They'd hunt as well. Hunting during winter. When the winter storm subsided, some tribes went out to hunt fresh game. Sometimes it was to ensure their cache of dried food would last them all winter. But other times, they wanted to taste some fresh meat. Smoked meats and jerky can get boring after a while. Tedium sets in, and with harsh winters, it can grow tiresome to eat the same thing. So they went out and hunted. And they were successful. In some cases, their success rate was as high as 60 to 70%. Think of us modern hunters and fishers. Even with our guns, advanced tracking gear, and a library's worth of knowledge at our fingertips, we often come from our hunting or fishing trip empty-handed. Not the natives. What looked like a winter wonderland to us was a map to where the wildlife was. The natives were forensic experts when it came to reading animal footprints. They could tell the animal, its size, and even its speed. Depending on the snow's edges, they could tell if the tracks were fresh or old. They would notice broken twigs, nibbled bark, and could even see a moose's breath from afar. Modern hunters may notice the basic animal signs like droppings, tracks, etc., but the natives were like machines with this. They were also perfectly dressed, able to withstand long periods of time out in the cold without the risk of frostbite. We've discussed snowshoes before, which would let the natives glide across the snow without making a sound. This painting from George Catlin, Buffalo Chase in Winter, Indians on Snowshoes, showcases the effectiveness perfectly. The natives walk on the snow with ease, while the heavy buffalo sink in. In many cases, animals did not possess feet that could walk on snow, making them easy targets for those who don't sink in or make noise when they walk. To the natives, the woods during the winter were nature's frozen food section. Besides shoes, the natives would wear white fur parkas that would let them blend into the snowy surroundings or cover themselves in snow to mask their odor. Many of these fur parkas were made with parts of the animals that they hunted. This would help them not only sneak up on animals, but also stay warm during the hunt. We should also mention that hunts were a tribe's effort. Today, you may go alone or with a couple of hunting buddies to get your food, but the entire tribe was in on it. Someone may know where the elk were staying, or one may have reported fresh tracks. They would come back to the main team of hunters on what they found, the approximate direction, and then the hunters would swoop in for the kill. Once they hit their mark, the natives would then gather the animal to clean and dress it, preparing it for cooking. And when the hunt was over, the natives would thank the animal for their offering. They also showed respect by not harming the leader of the herd. Hunting was only half the fight, however. Another activity allowed them to secure more than their fill. And guess what? They were skilled at this as well. And fishing. Even the most seasoned fisherman doesn't want to fish during the winter. Not only does it require specialized materials to cut into the ice, but it is also cold and often yields few results. Yet, for Native Americans, this was the right time to fish. They were masters at ice fishing, and in some cases, they caught thousands of pounds of fish, enough to feed their expansive tribes. Again, think of a modern-day fishing trip, where you're lucky even to get a bite. If a pond were frozen, that was just a minor inconvenience. If the ice was thin, they could use a stone chisel or axe to chip away the ice, creating a small hole for them to fish. You still see this type of fishing today. But if the ice was thick, again, not a problem. Stones heated in a bonfire would help them melt through the ice. When the stone had cooled, they would clear away any slush, then put another rock into the indentation, eventually causing a hole small enough to form for them to start fishing. They didn't open a hole randomly in the pond either. They did so in areas where the fish were, determined by signs or by seeing where the fish congregated. This could be near an underwater spring, a reef, or a bend. Once the hole was open, it was time to fish, and they used some amazing ways to get their great catch. One method is through a fish decoy. These would be wooden carved fish, frog, or other animals that predator fish would eat. The tribesmen would then use shells, shiny stones, or natural dyes to make it look real and to attract the predator. They would dangle them in the water using a cord, and predator fish would chase after the decoy. When a predator pike got close, another fish would use a spear and strike. Soon they'd have a pile of fish for dinner. Though this wasn't the only way they would catch fish, another fishing method took months to make, but could net a huge catch. During the fall, tribesmen would place basket traps in side channels, anchor them, and wait. The traps themselves were masterfully constructed, and fish would go inside but couldn't leave. When winter came, they would break the ice where the trap was, and there would be a harvest of fish waiting. The native fishing techniques show how ahead of their time they were compared to other methods, including modern ones. These methods are still used among seasoned fishermen to get plenty of fish. And even then, their catch may not be as big as the ones the natives made hundreds of years ago. But as you may know, meat and fish aren't the only things you need for a balanced diet. You also need plenty of plants, too. Native Americans also knew how to procure plants that not only stayed fresh during the winter, but provided sustenance as well. Finding plants in a winter wonderland. When you picture plants in a winter wonderland, what do you imagine? Odds are you imagine a whole lot of nothing. The fruits, vegetables, and herbs are nowhere to be seen. Therefore, it seems like the only solution is to harvest them during the growing seasons and find a way to store them, right? Not quite. Some plants were built to thrive during the winter, and plants we would not think of eating were on the menu, including bark? That's right. When we think of eating tree bark, we believe it's for the birds and the beavers. But the truth was that the inner bark, or cambium, of trees could provide vitamins, such as vitamin C and carbs, when you were in a pinch. Not only that, but the layer they were eating was thin or moist, so it wasn't like you were biting into a stick. In fact, it could be added to other foods or even ground into a flour. Yes, you could make bark bread, and you thought that keto bread was a wild invention. Cambium could be found in any tree, but particular trees work better than others. One example is pines, spruces, and birches. The natives would do it in a way that was the least harmful to a tree as well. It was almost like they were performing a delicate surgery on the tree. For example, they would take strips out from around the trunk. Sometimes they knew that the answer wasn't ahead of them, but below. Roots and tubers could be a valuable source of nutrition and calories. One example is the rhizomes of cattails. These roots, in particular, were rich in calories and could be made into a paste or a flour. Another example of the answer being below them was nuts. If you dug under the snow and leaves, you could find acorns, hickory nuts, chestnuts, and other stashes that the squirrels didn't find. You could crack them open or wait for them to sprout and have them then. Sometimes the plants weren't eaten but made into teas. Pine needles, wintergreen leaves, and willow bark could be used to make some teas that would not only warm you up during the winter, but also provide plenty of vitamins and minerals. The natives did not know all of the B vitamins, but they did know that wintergreen leaf tea could reduce pain, pine needles could prevent scurvy, and willow bark was also a powerful pain relief. You may reach for an ibuprofen while the natives drank tea from plants and probably felt better for it. But that wasn't the only thing they ate. When the plant life was dead and the only thing still standing was the nutrient-rich clay on the ground, they may have eaten the clay and the earth. Many of us wouldn't dare eat dirt, but think about it. The clay and earth below us give plant life plenty of nutrients. White clay that grew in the Great Plains provided valuable minerals such as calcium and iron, two components that many types of meat don't have. This practice is what's known as geophagy, and it's still done today. The natives knew that they needed a balanced diet of vitamins and minerals to survive, and in wintertime, they couldn't just buy a multivitamin from the store. Of course, the natives also kept dried fruits handy. Dried fruits and pemmican. Like meats, the natives knew that berries, which would grow in the summer, could be dried and stored to make superfoods in the winter. If you had a sweet tooth, you could reach into your cache and pull out some dried cranberries, choke cherries, blueberries, or whatever fruit was growing in that area. Of course, while dried fruits can be amazing, nothing beats a fresh, juice-filled fruit. Luckily, there were some fruits still growing. High brush cranberries and rose hips, for instance, would stay during the winter. They would be frozen, but could be thawed out quite easily. But that wasn't the only way they ate berries. We've discussed this superfood before, but it bears repeating. Enter pemmican. This food combined several items that the natives already had stored. They would take the dried meat they had and pulverize it. Any animal fat they had stored would be mixed in, and berries would be used for flavor. The Northern Plains and Cree tribes invented this superfood, and it became more popular during the food trade for a good reason. It was a powerhouse of protein, fats, vitamins, and minerals. Because of its dried nature, it could be stored for a long time. It was their emergency rations, and more modern societies would catch on to this fantastic food and use it as emergency rations. And it was easy to store. An entire bison's meat supply could be hard to store. However, you could put pemmican made from an entire bison into a barrel, and it was only 90 pounds. All it took was a few strong tribesmen to bring it to their tribe when supplies were running low. How you could eat the food was versatile as well. Many would, understandably, eat it raw, but others would mix in flour and fry it, put it into some stews, such as rubaboo, or mix in some vegetables if they had them in stock. Tell us, would you try pemmican? Personally, it does look delicious. If that's all the food you could eat, it honestly seems like a good deal. That being said, what happens when the summer harvest isn't great? What happens when there's not much food outside, you're snowed in, and even the emergency rations are fading fast? Emergency survival, native style. Whether it was human error, early freezes, or enemy raids, natives could be underprepared for the winter. There were even seasons when they were underprepared for an overpowered winter, which put a huge strain on resources. So how did they survive? Did they huddle up and wait for death? Did they think about eating each other? Not a chance. Native American survival had plans upon plans, backups for backups. When times got tough, they had emergency rations for emergency rations. One example is eating bone grease and marrow instead of using it for other means. When you eat meat with bones in it, do you throw out the bones or give them to your dog? Most of us do, as they like to gnaw on the marrow and enjoy the taste. The natives did not do that. They stored bones, and when the going got tough, they smashed them into many pieces and boiled them. Bones contain fat and grease that, once melted, can be skimmed off the broth. This fat contains calories that would help them survive until better food arrives. It wasn't the most filling, but it kept you alive, which was what mattered. And the thing about bones is that they are reusable. You could boil them multiple times and find more bone grease. Nowadays, this has been rediscovered and marketed as bone broth, like it's a nutritional breakthrough. However, the natives have been doing it for thousands of years. Remember, the natives were famous for using every part of the animal. What seemed like junk to us could be a lifesaver. But what happens when even the bones are consumed? What could the natives eat then? Sometimes they'd literally eat their clothes. The natives dressed in hides and leather, and by boiling leather scraps, they could be eaten. Of course, sometimes they had excess leather left over, so they did not necessarily need to put on their birthday suits. The more you boiled leather, the more jelly-like it would become. Leather is a collagen, so it does provide protein. Even Lewis and Clark had to boil their buffalo hide moccasins before to survive. Of course, this was a last resort. If the natives could find another source, they would do so. The power of community. Finally, we should discuss how the natives relied on the community to survive during the winter. Community is a long-lost art nowadays. In an age where people don't want to speak to their neighbors and we feel more divided than ever, the natives knew this wasn't a good idea. Every member of the community had something to contribute, and they did. The able-bodied men and women would cook, gather food, and protect the vulnerable. Children who would grow up to lead the next generation were fed first and taken care of, even during times of scarcity. The same was true with the elders. Even if an elder could not contribute that much, they had done their time in their youth, and the tribe would take care of them until the end. And this was a community where selfishness was not tolerated. You had a full plate, but your other tribesmen had scraps? You'd be feeding them some of yours. Another tribe nearby had a plentiful harvest, and yours didn't? You'd send a smoke signal as an SOS, and you may exchange furs or other goods that the other tribe didn't have. If you didn't have anything, the other tribe may be generous, knowing that in their own times of crisis, you would be there to help them with whatever you had. Community bonding would pay off too. It's estimated that starvation deaths were half of the deaths in the more isolated, so-called civilized societies. In fact, the natives would help the explorers as well. Back to Lewis and Clark, their expedition ran into the Mandan, who shared their food. They had a stash of corn, dried beans, and buffalo. Chief Sheheki told them something that stuck with them. It goes something like this: "If we eat, you will eat. If we starve, you too must starve." This quote was powerful, showing how the community would help, but also help each other in moments of crisis. Another way that the community helped? Preventing other members from going stir-crazy. Often, you'd be trapped in a teepee, but you'd be so with your other members. You may tell stories of tribes long past. You'd craft with your fellow women or hold ceremonies. These activities gave the tribes purpose and a way to pass the time. Meanwhile, a loner may slowly mentally deteriorate if they are isolated for too long. We are not saying that the natives did not have their own cabin fever, but it was less intense than the fever we may experience, even being home alone for a couple of days in the 21st century. And that is how the Native Americans survived the winter. Let's be honest, most of us could not last a week in the cold, using only the land around us to make a living. But the natives did it for generations upon generations. We hope you enjoyed the video. Natives had many unique ways of surviving the winter, and this video is only a small glimpse into their fascinating world of survival. If you want more, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Also, have you ever tried surviving in the winter? How did it go? Let us know in the comments.